In 1177 BCE, the Bronze Age world burned. Great empires that had stood for centuries fell one by one. Cities that had prospered for 1,000 years turned to ash in a single night. And the destroyers vanished without a trace. This is not fiction. This is the greatest unsolved mystery of the ancient world. Imagine walking through the ruins of Ugarit, one of the wealthiest ports of the Bronze Age. The palace walls are scorched black. Clay tablets lie scattered on the floor, their final message still readable. 7 enemy ships have been spotted. The city is burning. Send help immediately. No help ever came, and Ugarit never rose again. Across the Mediterranean, the same scene repeated itself. Hattusa, the mighty capital of the Hittite Empire, reduced to rubble. The palaces of Mycenae, consumed by flames so intense they vitrified the stone. Troy, Knossos, Ashkelon, Hazor. City after city, civilization after civilization, all destroyed within a single generation. The few survivors who escaped told terrifying tales. Warriors from the sea, speaking unknown languages. Fleets of strange ships, appearing from nowhere. Armies that fought differently, moved differently, destroyed everything in their path. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples. They carved their images on temple walls, desperate to record what they had witnessed. Strange warriors with feathered headdresses. Ships unlike anything seen before. Women and children traveling with the armies, suggesting this wasn't just a raid. This was a migration, or perhaps an apocalypse. Here's what makes this mystery so compelling. We know they existed. We have the Egyptian records, the archaeological evidence, the burned cities. We know they destroyed the international system that had lasted for centuries. We know they brought down empires that seemed invincible. But we don't know who they were. We don't know where they came from. And most mysteriously, we don't know where they went. After destroying the known world, after bringing the Bronze Age to a catastrophic end, they simply disappeared. No homeland to return to. No new empire established. No clear descendants. They emerged from history like a storm, devastated everything, and vanished back into the darkness. Tonight, we investigate the greatest military success that nobody can explain. The most devastating invasion conducted by ghosts. The apocalypse that ended an age and birthed 300 years of darkness. If you're ready to look beyond the veil of forgotten myths and uncover the secrets the world chose to forget, subscribe to Inside Strange Times so you won't miss new journeys into the realm of ancient mysteries. To understand the magnitude of what the Sea Peoples destroyed, we must first understand what existed before. The year 1250 BCE marked the height of the Bronze Age, a golden era of international trade and diplomacy. Picture a world where Egyptian pharaohs exchanged gifts with Hittite kings, where Mycenaean merchants sailed to Cyprus for copper, then to Syria for ivory, then to Egypt for gold, where a letter could travel from Babylon to Crete, and everyone along the route could read it. This was the first global economy, not in the modern sense, but interconnected in ways that wouldn't be seen again for 1,000 years. The Amarna letters, discovered in Egypt, reveal this world in stunning detail. Over 380 clay tablets containing diplomatic correspondence between the great powers. Listen to the voice of Tushratta, king of Mitanni, writing to Pharaoh Amenhotep III. May you rejoice, may your house rejoice, may your wives rejoice. I send you a chariot, 2 horses, and 1 date stone of genuine lapis lazuli. The tone is warm, familiar. These rulers knew each other. Their children intermarried. Their merchants traveled freely. Their armies maintained the peace. The city of Ugarit alone had texts in 7 different scripts: Sumerian, Akkadian, Hurrian, Hittite, Egyptian, Cypro-Minoan, and their own Ugaritic alphabet. This was a cosmopolitan world where a merchant needed to speak multiple languages just to conduct daily business, where diplomatic marriages created vast networks of alliance and kinship, where the tin from Afghanistan met the copper from Cyprus to forge the bronze that gave the age its name. Archaeological evidence from this period shows unprecedented wealth. The cargo of the Uluburun shipwreck, discovered off the Turkish coast, carried goods from at least 7 different cultures. 10 tons of copper, 1 ton of tin, ebony logs from Africa, hippopotamus teeth, tortoise shells, ostrich eggshells, glass ingots that chemical analysis traces to Egypt, pottery from Cyprus, weapons from Greece, jewelry from Canaan. 1 ship carrying the wealth of the entire Mediterranean world. The palace economies that controlled this trade were marvels of organization. The linear B tablets from Pylos and Knossos show bureaucracies tracking everything. How many sheep grazed in each field? How much olive oil each district produced? How many bronze weapons the smiths forged each month? These weren't just kingdoms, they were corporate enterprises, running on efficiency and written records. But by 1200 BCE, something had changed. The letters between kingdoms took on a desperate tone. The king of Ugarit writes to the king of Cyprus, "My father, the enemy's ships are here. They have burned my towns and done evil things in my country. All my troops are in Hittite country. All my ships are in Lycia. The country is abandoned to itself. The response from Cyprus is even more chilling. As for what you have written me, the enemy ships have been seen at sea. Well, you must remain firm. 20 enemy ships, even 30 enemy ships, have certainly not defeated you. Make your troops and chariots ready. But where are your own troops and chariots stationed? Are they not stationed with you? If not, who will deliver you from the enemy forces? The archaeological record shows what happened next. Destruction layers, thick bands of ash and rubble appear simultaneously across the eastern Mediterranean. Not the gradual decay of abandoned cities, but violent, sudden annihilation. At Mycenae, the palace burned so hot that mud bricks melted into glass. The fire reached temperatures over 1,200 degrees Celsius, far beyond a normal building fire. Someone had deliberately stoked these flames, feeding them until stone itself began to flow. In the throne room, archaeologists found bronze arrowheads embedded in the walls, signs of a last, desperate defense. At Pylos, the Linear B tablets tell the final story. The last texts, preserved only because they were baked hard in the fires, speak of watchers being posted, rowers being sent to Pleuron, bronze temple ornaments being melted down for spearheads. The very last tablet, found near the entrance, is an inventory of sacrificial animals. Perhaps a final offering to gods who didn't answer. The Hittite capital of Hattusa presents an even stranger picture. The city wasn't just destroyed, it was systematically demolished. The walls were pulled down stone by stone. The temples were not just burned, but their foundations were dug up. Someone wanted to ensure this city would never rise again. The royal archives, containing thousands of tablets, were scattered and smashed, as if the attackers were trying to erase not just the city, but its memory. What makes these destruction layers remarkable is their synchronicity. Carbon dating and pottery analysis show that cities hundreds of miles apart fell within the same decade. Some archaeologists narrow it down to just a few years, clustered around 1,177 BCE. This wasn't a slow decline or a series of unrelated local conflicts. This was a catastrophe that swept across the known world like a prehistoric world war. The trade networks that had sustained the Bronze Age collapsed overnight. The tin routes from Afghanistan severed. The copper mines of Cyprus abandoned. Without tin, there could be no bronze. Without bronze, there could be no weapons, no tools, no civilization as they knew it. The palace bureaucracies, with their careful records and centralized control, vanished. The art of writing itself disappeared in many regions. Greece wouldn't rediscover literacy for 400 years. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge of the Mycenaeans lost. Construction, techniques, forgotten. Even the location of some cities erased from memory. The population collapse was staggering. Archaeological surveys show that Greece lost up to 90% of its population, not through death alone, but through flight. People abandoned the coasts, fled to the mountains, reverted to subsistence farming. Sites that had been inhabited for 1,000 years stood empty. In Anatolia, the situation was even worse. The entire central plateau, once the heartland of the Hittite Empire, became virtually uninhabited. Surveys find almost no pottery, no buildings, no signs of life for generations after 1180 BCE. It was as if civilization itself had been erased. The Levantine coast tells a similar story. Every major port city shows destruction. Sidon, Tyre, Ashkelon, Ashdod, all burned. Trade goods vanish from the archaeological record. Imported pottery, which had been common as dirt, disappears completely. Local pottery styles become crude, handmade, as if the potter's wheels had been forgotten. Even Egypt, which survived the onslaught, was transformed. The empire that had controlled Nubia to the south and Canaan to the north contracted to the Nile Valley. Egyptian garrisons abroad, abandoned. Trade expeditions ceased. The great temple building projects halted. Egypt survived, but it would never again be the superpower it had been. This is what historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Not a transition, not an evolution, but a collapse. The lights of civilization going out, one by one, until darkness covered the Mediterranean. The Dark Age that followed lasted 3 centuries. 300 years of reduced population, limited trade, crude material culture. When writing returned to Greece, they had no memory of the Mycenaean palaces. Homer's epics, composed centuries later, remembered only fragments transformed into myth. But who could have done this? Who had the power to destroy empires that had lasted for centuries? Who could coordinate attacks across thousands of miles? Who could erase civilizations so thoroughly that even their names were forgotten? The answer lies in those desperate letters, in those Egyptian carvings, in those layers of ash. The Sea Peoples. But knowing their name doesn't mean we know who they were. Let's examine the victims, one by one. Each fallen civilization tells part of the story. Each destroyed city adds another piece to the puzzle. The Hittite Empire was the first superpower to fall completely. For 3 centuries, they had dominated Anatolia and northern Syria. Their capital, Hattusa, covered 180 hectares, protected by 6 kilometers of massive walls. The city's fortifications were an engineering marvel, with over 100 towers, secret tunnels, and multiple gates. The Lion Gate, the King's Gate, the Warrior Gate, each a masterpiece of Bronze Age architecture. When archaeologist Kurt Biddle excavated Hattusa in the 1930s, he found something unprecedented. The city hadn't just been conquered, it had been methodically destroyed. The palace district showed signs of intense fire, but this wasn't random destruction. Specific buildings were targeted. The Temple of the Storm God completely demolished. The royal residence burned at temperatures that melted bronze fittings into puddles. But humble dwellings nearby, left untouched. More mysterious still, the city seems to have been partially evacuated before the attack. The royal archives contained thousands of tablets, but the most recent texts were missing. No bodies were found in the palace, no treasures in the temples, as if the Hittites knew what was coming and tried to save what they could. The last Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, left records of sea battles. Ships of Alashia battled against me on the sea 3 times, and I destroyed them. But who these sea enemies were, he doesn't say. After his reign, silence. The Hittite Empire, which had fought Ramesses II to a standstill at Kadesh, simply ceased to exist. The archaeological evidence from other Hittite cities confirms the catastrophe. Alaka-Hoyuk, burned and abandoned. Alisar, destroyed. Mashat-Hayuk, obliterated so thoroughly that its ancient name is lost. Each site shows the same pattern: targeted destruction of administrative buildings, intense fires, then abandonment. But the Hittites left us one crucial clue. A letter from the last days found at Ugarit. The enemy advances against us, and there are no soldiers here. The enemy has imprisoned my messengers. Send me a man who knows the language of the enemy. This detail is critical. The attackers spoke a language unknown to the cosmopolitan Hittites, who regularly dealt with dozens of different peoples. These were outsiders, strangers to the Bronze Age world. Moving west to the Aegean, we find the magnificent Mycenaean civilization in ruins. These were the Greeks of the Trojan War, the builders of Cyclopean walls, the warriors buried with golden masks. Their palace culture had dominated Greece for 500 years. Pylos was among the first to fall. The palace of King Nestor, celebrated in Homer's epics, burned so suddenly that everyday items were left where they dropped. Drinking cups on tables, cooking pots on hearths, bathtubs still containing bath oil mixed with iris petals, but also hundreds of bronze arrowheads concentrated near the main entrance. The marks of a fierce battle. The linear B tablets from Pylos, accidentally preserved by the fire, record the kingdom's last days. Orders for bronze to be collected from temple doors. Commands for the coast watchers to maintain their posts. lists of rowers being mustered, perhaps for evacuation. One tablet mentions women and children being moved to safety. Another records offerings to Poseidon, god of the sea, and earthquakes. Were they praying for deliverance from enemies who came by sea? Mycenae itself, the most powerful citadel in Greece, shows multiple destruction layers. The first attack damaged, but didn't destroy the city. The Mycenaeans rebuilt, stronger than before. They extended their walls to protect the water supply. They stockpiled weapons and grain. But it wasn't enough. The second destruction was final. The palace burned. The workshops where master craftsmen had created wonders in gold and ivory reduced to ash. The megarons, where kings had held court for centuries, collapsed into rubble. Tiryns, with its massive walls up to 17 meters thick, thought to be impregnable, destroyed. Midea, with its impressive Tholos tombs, burned. Thebes, legendary city of 7 gates, abandoned. Orchomenos, controller of the rich Kopais plain, obliterated. The island of Crete, once home to the sophisticated Minoan civilization, already weakened by earlier disasters, received the final blow. Knossos, which had survived earthquakes and invasions for 2,000 years, was abandoned. The great palace with its famous frescoes left to crumble. Phaistos, Malea, Zakros, all the palatial centers, deserted. Crete wouldn't see such prosperity again until Roman times. But it's in the Levant where we find the most detailed evidence of the catastrophe. The city of Ugarit, modern Ras Shamra in Syria, provides our most intimate glimpse of the disaster. Ugarit was fabulously wealthy. Located on the Syrian coast, it controlled trade between the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. Its merchants dealt in purple dye, worth more than gold. Its scribes had invented the world's first alphabet. Its palace covered 10,000 square meters, with 90 rooms, 5 courtyards, and a legendary garden. The French archaeologist Claude Schaeffer, who excavated Ugarit, found evidence of sudden catastrophe. Streets littered with weapons, houses with valuables still hidden in secret caches. Most telling, clay tablets still in the kiln, waiting to be fired. These were letters that would never be sent. One tablet found in the kiln contains the last words of Ugarit. Our food in the threshing floors is burned, and the vineyards are destroyed. Our city is destroyed, and you should know it. The tone is matter-of-fact, almost resigned, as if the writer knew no help would come. Another letter from the king of Ugarit to the king of Cyprus is more desperate. My father, now enemy ships have come. They have been setting fire to my cities and have done harm to the land. Doesn't my father know that all my infantry and chariotry are stationed in Hittite land, and that all my ships are stationed in Lycia and haven't returned yet? Thus, the land is abandoned to itself. My father should know that 7 enemy ships have come and done evil things. If other enemy ships turn up, send me a report somehow, so that I will know." The response from Cyprus offers cold comfort. "As for the matter of the enemy ships, about which you wrote, well, now, even if enemy ships have been sighted, remain firm. Your walls are strong and you have infantry, chariotry, and cavalry in your city. As for the question of what the enemy has done to your land, did they not regularly do such things in the past? But Ugarit had no infantry or chariotry. They were all abroad, fulfilling treaty obligations to the Hittites. The city was defenseless. Archaeological evidence shows it burned at over 1,200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt limestone into quicklime. The fire was so intense that archaeologists can still identify the wind direction that day based on the burn patterns. The wind blew from the west, from the sea. After Ugarit's destruction, it was never rebuilt. The site remained abandoned for 3,000 years until archaeologists arrived. The purple dye industry source of the city's wealth disappeared. The technique wouldn't be rediscovered for a millennium. Down the coast, other great cities met similar fates. Byblos, one of the oldest cities in the world, shows a massive destruction layer. Sidon, later famous for its glass-making, burned. Tyre, the great island fortress, damaged but not destroyed, one of the few to partially survive. Tel Abu Hawam, near modern Haifa, completely destroyed. The excavator found arrowheads throughout the destruction debris. Both bronze arrows of the defenders and a different type, possibly belonging to the attackers. The city was rebuilt, but in a completely different style. New pottery, new architecture, new burial customs. As if the original population had been replaced entirely. Inland cities weren't spared either. Hazor, the largest city in Canaan, covering 200 acres, was burned so thoroughly that the heat cracked the basalt slabs of the palace floor. Megiddo, the fortress guarding the Jezreel Valley, destroyed and rebuilt by newcomers. Lachish, second only to Jerusalem in later times, shows massive destruction, followed by a century of abandonment. But perhaps the most intriguing site is Ashkelon. Here, the destruction layer contains something unique, clear evidence of the destroyers themselves. After burning the Canaanite city, the attackers didn't leave. They stayed and built their own settlement. The pottery changes completely. New styles appear, some with similarities to Aegean pottery, but not quite matching any known tradition. These might be the sea peoples themselves, or at least one group of them. Cyprus, the copper island essential to Bronze Age economy, shows widespread destruction. Ankomi, the main city, burned and partially abandoned. Kishan, heavily damaged. Sinda, destroyed. But here too we see something strange. After the destruction, new pottery styles appear. Locally made, but in foreign styles. As if the attackers had settled down and started making their own pottery. Troy itself, the legendary city, may have been another victim. Troy the Sevia, the layer dating to around 1180 BCE, shows clear signs of destruction by fire. Arrowheads litter the streets. Hastily buried bodies were found beneath houses. Storage jars sunk into the ground as if the population was preparing for siege. Could the Trojan War of legend actually be a memory of the Sea People's assault? Some archaeologists think so, and the timing fits. The destruction is real, but the attacker's identity remains mysterious. Even sites we wouldn't expect show signs of the catastrophe. In the Western Mediterranean, Sardinia shows massive changes around 1200 BCE. The Nuragic civilization builders of mysterious stone towers suddenly started constructing massive fortifications, as if they too feared the chaos spreading from the east. In Sicily, settlements were abandoned and populations moved inland. In southern Italy, the Terramare culture collapsed completely. Even in distant Britain, the archaeological record shows upheaval. Hill forts were strengthened and weapons production increased, as if the entire ancient world sensed danger. The cumulative picture is staggering. Within perhaps a single generation, the entire Eastern Mediterranean Bronze Age civilization collapsed. Trade networks that had functioned for centuries severed. Cities that had stood for millennia abandoned. Knowledge accumulated over generations lost. The Greek Dark Age that followed lasted from 1100 to 800 BCE. 3 centuries during which Greeks forgot how to write, forgot how to build in stone, forgot how to paint representational art, forgot even the locations of many Bronze Age sites. When Greeks started writing again using an alphabet borrowed from the Phoenicians, they had no memory of the Mycenaean palaces, no knowledge of Linear B. Their own ancestors had become the stuff of legend. In Anatolia, the darkness was even deeper. The central plateau remained virtually uninhabited for generations. Small groups of nomads perhaps, but no cities, no settlements large enough to leave archaeological traces. The Hittite language disappeared, completely preserved only in buried archives that wouldn't be rediscovered for 3,000 years. The Levant recovered faster but was transformed. The Canaanite city-states never regained their independence. New peoples appeared: the Philistines, the Israelites, the Arameans, each claiming territory in the ruins of the Bronze Age world. The magnificent palace culture replaced by smaller, simpler settlements. International trade reduced to local exchange. Even Egypt, the sole survivor among the great powers, was diminished. The New Kingdom, which had seen Tutankhamun and Ramesses II, faded into the Third Intermediate Period, a time of division, weakness, and foreign domination. Egypt survived the Sea Peoples, but it never fully recovered its Bronze Age glory. The pattern of destruction tells us something important about the attackers. This wasn't mindless vandalism. Palaces and temples were specifically targeted. Administrative centers destroyed. But ordinary houses often survived. The attackers knew exactly what they were doing. They were systematically dismantling the power structures of the Bronze Age world. The speed of the collapse also tells us something. These weren't separate, uncoordinated attacks. The destruction was synchronized, planned, executed with terrible efficiency. Cities hundreds of miles apart, falling in the same year. As if the attackers had a strategy, a plan to bring down the entire Bronze Age system. But who were they? Where did they come from? Why did they attack? And perhaps most mysteriously, where did they go? After destroying the known world, they vanished, leaving only ruins and questions. The Egyptians alone among the great powers survived to tell the tale. On the walls of Medinet Habu, carved in stone for eternity, they recorded their desperate struggle against the invaders. They named them, described them, depicted them in detail. These records, the only contemporary account of the Sea Peoples, provide our best window into this ancient apocalypse. But they also deepen the mystery. Because even the Egyptians who fought them face to face didn't really know who they were. Egypt alone survived to bear witness. On the walls of Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramesses III near Thebes, we find the most complete record of the Sea Peoples. Carved in stone, painted in vivid detail, here is the story of how one civilization faced the apocalypse and lived. The temple itself is a monument to survival. Built around 1180 BCE, just as the Bronze Age world was collapsing, it stands as a testament to Egyptian resilience. The walls stretch for meters, covered in hieroglyphics and relief carvings. Every surface tells part of the story. And what a story it is. Ramesses III didn't just record his victory, he documented everything. The names of the enemy peoples, their appearance, their weapons, their ships, their battle tactics, their family structures, even their clothing. This obsessive detail suggests something important. The Egyptians knew they were facing something unprecedented, something that needed to be recorded for posterity. The inscription begins with cosmic language. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once, the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms. The Egyptian scribes are telling us this wasn't a normal invasion. This was a conspiracy, a coordinated assault planned in distant islands. The text continues with a roll call of the destroyed. Hatti-Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Alashia. The Hittites, Cilicia, northern Syria, western, Anatolia, Cyprus, all cut off at one time. The Egyptian account matches exactly what archaeology shows us. These places were indeed destroyed all at once, just as the inscription claims. But then comes the crucial information, the names of the attackers. The Egyptians list them carefully, as if cataloging demons. The Peliset, the Checker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, the Weshesh. These names, preserved in hieroglyphics, are our only clues to the destroyers' identities. The Peliset are perhaps the most famous. Most scholars believe these became the Philistines of the Bible. The similarities are striking. The name itself, Peliset to Philistine. The geographic placement settling on the southern Levantine coast. The material culture showing Aegean influences, but not quite Greek. Even their reputation as foreign invaders matches biblical accounts. The Egyptian reliefs show the Peliset wearing distinctive feathered headdresses. Not feathers exactly, but perhaps horsehair or leather strips arranged in a crown-like display. Their warriors carry round shields and straight swords. Their ships have bird-head prows unlike anything in Egyptian or Near Eastern tradition. These details are consistent across multiple reliefs, suggesting accurate observation rather than artistic convention. The checker appear alongside the Peliset in many inscriptions. Later, Egyptian texts place them at Dor on the coast of modern Israel. Archaeological excavations at Tel Dor have found exactly at this period new pottery styles and burial customs. The checkers seem to have settled and stayed becoming part of the post-collapse world. The Shekelesh present an intriguing puzzle. Their name might connect to Sicily, called Sikalia by the Greeks, or perhaps to the Sagalassos region of Anatolia. The Egyptian reliefs show them with distinctive horned helmets. Similar helmets appear in Sardinian bronze figurines from this period. Were the Shekelesh from the Western Mediterranean? If so, it suggests the Sea Peoples came from much farther than previously thought. The Denyen might be the Danuna mentioned in earlier texts, possibly connected to the Homeric Danaui, another name for Greeks, or perhaps to the city of Adana in Cilicia. The name appears in multiple forms across different sources, suggesting a people well known but hard to place. The Weshesh are the most mysterious. They appear only in Egyptian texts with no clear connections elsewhere. The reliefs show them similarly equipped to the other Sea Peoples, but their origin remains completely unknown. A people who emerged from darkness, destroyed civilizations, and vanished without leaving even their name. But Ramesses III gives us more than just names. He describes two distinct attacks separated by several years. This wasn't a single raid, but a sustained assault on Egyptian power. The first attack came in year 5 of his reign, around 1180 BCE. This was primarily a land invasion coming through the Levant. The inscription describes a massive movement of peoples. They came with fire before them forward toward Egypt. Their confederation consisted of Peliset, Jeker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh. United lands. The phrase united lands is crucial. These weren't random raiders. They had formed an alliance, a confederation with a common purpose. The destruction of Egypt, the last great Bronze Age power. Ramesses met them in southern Palestine, probably near Gaza. The relief carvings show a massive battle. Egyptian chariots charging into crowds of foreign warriors. The Sea Peoples fighting on foot with their distinctive gear. But also, and this is important, ox carts carrying women and children. These ox carts change everything about how we understand the Sea Peoples. Raiders don't bring their families. Armies don't travel with ox carts full of household goods. This was a migration, entire populations on the move. The reliefs show the carts clearly two-wheeled vehicles pulled by humped cattle. Inside, women and children peer out, their faces carved with remarkable detail. One relief shows an Egyptian soldier about to strike a woman protecting her child. Another shows a Sea People's warrior turning back, trying to defend his family's cart. These aren't artistic conventions. These are observations of real events, moments of human drama frozen in stone. The land battle was fierce but decisive. Egyptian discipline and chariot tactics prevailed. The Sea Peoples were stopped but not destroyed. Many survivors fled to the coast, regrouped, and prepared for a second assault. Year 8 of Ramesses III, around 1177 BCE, brought the second and more dangerous attack. This time, the Sea Peoples came by sea. The inscription is dramatic. Those who came upon the sea, the full flame was in front of them at the river mouths. A stockade of lances surrounded them on the shore. The naval battle relief at Medinet Habu is one of the most detailed ancient depictions of sea warfare. It shows two types of ships locked in combat: Egyptian vessels with lion head prows and organized rowers, Sea People's ships with bird head prows and no visible oars, only sails. This detail about the ships is significant. The Sea People's vessels appear to be primarily sailing ships, not galleys. This suggests they were designed for long-distance travel, not coastal raiding. You don't cross the Mediterranean with your entire family in a ship without oars, unless you're planning a one-way journey. The battle scene is chaos carved in stone. Ships ramming each other, warriors falling into the water, Egyptian archers shooting from the shore, Sea People's warriors with their feathered headdresses drowning among the waves. One remarkable detail: some Sea People's ships are shown capsized, their crews struggling in the water. Ramesses claims total victory. They were dragged in, enclosed, and prostrated on the beach, killed and made into heaps from tail to head. Their ships and goods were as if fallen into the water. The language is brutal specific. This wasn't just a victory, it was annihilation. But was it really so complete? Other Egyptian texts suggest a more complex outcome. The Papyrus Harris, written shortly after Ramesses III's death, mentions Sea Peoples being settled in Egyptian strongholds, captured warriors becoming mercenaries, their families given land in exchange for military service. This practice of settling defeated enemies wasn't unusual for Egypt, but it means some Sea Peoples survived integrated, became part of Egyptian society. Their descendants might have lived in Egypt for generations, their foreign origins gradually forgotten. The Onomasticon of Amenhotep, written about a century later, lists the Sea Peoples among the inhabitants of the Levantine coast. The Djeker at Dor, The Peliset in the Philistine cities, the Shekelesh location unknown, but somewhere in the region they hadn't vanished. They had transformed from destroyers into settlers. But the Egyptian records also tell us what they don't know. Nowhere does Ramesses III explain where the Sea Peoples came from originally. The phrase "their islands" is frustratingly vague. Which islands? The Aegean, the Western Mediterranean, or is islands a metaphor for distant lands? The Egyptians also don't explain why the Sea Peoples attacked. No grievances are listed, no demands recorded. The inscriptions treat them like a natural disaster, a plague that had to be endured, as if their motivation was destruction itself. Even more puzzling, the Egyptian records don't explain how the Sea Peoples destroyed the Hittites. Egypt's great rival, an empire that had fought them to a standstill just decades earlier, simply vanishes from Egyptian texts. No gloating over a fallen enemy. No details of their destruction. Just silence, as if the Hittites had never existed. Earlier Egyptian records provide some context. Merneptah, Ramesses III's predecessor, also fought Sea Peoples. His inscription from around 1208 BCE mentions different but related groups. The Aquesh, Teresh, Luca, Shurdan, and Shekelesh. Some names overlap with Ramesses III's list, others are unique. The Shurdan are particularly interesting. They appear in Egyptian records as both enemies and allies. Some served as mercenaries in the Egyptian army. Others attacked Egypt alongside the other Sea Peoples. The reliefs show them with distinctive horned helmets, round shields, and long swords. Their name might connect to Sardinia, where similar bronze figurines have been found. The Luca were definitely from Anatolia, the region called Lycia in classical times. They appear in Hittite texts as troublesome pirates. Their presence among the Sea Peoples suggests at least some came from the collapsing Hittite sphere. The Aquesh might be the Achaeans, Homer's name for the Greeks. If so, it places Mycenaean Greeks among the attackers. But this is debated. The Egyptian writing of foreign names is notoriously uncertain. The Teresh have been connected to the Tyrrhenians, the Greek name for the Etruscans. If true, it suggests Sea Peoples from the Western Mediterranean, perhaps from Italy. But again, the connection is linguistic speculation. What's clear from all Egyptian records is the unprecedented nature of the threat. These weren't typical raiders or invaders. They were something new, something that required special attention to document. The Egyptians carved their story in stone, painted it on walls, wrote it on papyrus, as if they knew future generations would need to know what had happened. The medical papyrus Edwin Smith from roughly this period shows a sudden increase in trauma injuries. Skull fractures, sword wounds, arrow injuries. The doctors of Egypt were learning battlefield medicine, treating wounds they'd rarely seen before. Even in victory, Egypt bore scars. Economic texts show the strain of constant warfare. Temple donations increased dramatically, perhaps seeking divine protection. Grain reserves were depleted. Trade goods became scarce. The price of metals skyrocketed. Egypt survived, but at tremendous cost. One final Egyptian clue comes from an unexpected source. The cache of diplomatic correspondence found at Tel El Amarna includes one curious letter, written decades before the Sea People's attacks. It mentions pirates from Lucca raiding Cyprus. Were these early Sea Peoples precursors to the later invasions, or just ordinary pirates who inspired something greater? The Egyptian records leave us with a paradox. We have more detail about the Sea Peoples from Egypt than anywhere else. Names, appearances, battle tactics, ship designs, but the essential questions remain unanswered. Who were they really? Where did they come from? Why did they attack? And where did the survivors go? For over a century, scholars have proposed theories about the Sea Peoples. Each new archaeological discovery adds evidence but also complications. The mystery deepens rather than resolves. Let's examine the major theories, each compelling, none complete. The Mycenaean refugee theory has strong archaeological support. We know the Mycenaean palaces were destroyed around 1200 BCE. We know the population fled. Linear B tablets from Pylos mention rowing crews and watchers, suggesting maritime evacuation. Could these fleeing Mycenaeans have become Sea Peoples? The pottery evidence is suggestive. After 1200 BCE, Mycenaean-style pottery appears in Cyprus, the Levant, and Egypt. Not imported pottery, but locally made vessels in Mycenaean style, as if Mycenaean potters had relocated and continued their craft. The distribution matches exactly where Egyptian texts place the Sea Peoples. At Ashkelon and Ashdod, cities occupied by the Peliset, according to Egyptian sources, the pottery is particularly telling. It is called Mycenaean 3C, 1B, a style that developed after the palace destructions. The pottery is well made, decorated with spirals and birds, clearly in the Aegean tradition, but with local variations suggesting adaptation to new circumstances. The burial customs also change in telling ways. At Azor near Tel Aviv, archaeologists found burials from exactly this period. The bodies were cremated, an Aegean practice foreign to the Levant. The grave goods included Aegean-style pottery and bronze weapons, but also Egyptian scarabs and Canaanite items. A fusion culture, newcomers adapting to their new home. The language evidence adds another layer. Later, Philistine names recorded in the Bible and Assyrian texts show possible Indo-European elements. Goliath, Achish, Phicol, these don't sound Semitic. Linguists detect possible Greek or Anatolian roots. The Philistines also used the title Sarin for their rulers, possibly related to Greek tyrannos. But there are problems with the Mycenaean theory. The destruction of Mycenaean palaces seems to have been internal, not external. No foreign weapons or pottery in the destruction layers. The palaces fell from within through revolution or collapse, not invasion. Would refugees from internal collapse have the organization to destroy other empires? Also, the Sea Peoples destroyed sites that show no previous Mycenaean contact. Inland Anatolian cities, Syrian towns, far from the coast. Would Mycenaean refugees travel so far inland? Would they have the knowledge to navigate these regions? The Anatolian origin theory addresses some of these issues. Western Anatolia was home to various peoples, the Luka, the Arzawans, others known only from fragments. These groups were maritime experienced raiders familiar with both coasts and inland routes. Hittite texts complain about their piracy for centuries before 1200 BCE. The collapse of Hittite power would have destabilized these peoples. Without imperial control, they might have turned to large-scale raiding, or perhaps fled environmental catastrophe seeking new lands. The ox carts shown in Egyptian reliefs match Anatolian styles from this period. Troy itself might be connected. Troy 7a was destroyed around 1180 BCE, right when the Sea Peoples were active. Some scholars suggest the Trojans defeated and displaced joined the Sea Peoples' confederation. The Homeric tradition of Aeneas fleeing Troy to found Rome might preserve a memory of westward migration. Archaeological evidence from Cilicia supports Anatolian involvement. Sites like Tarsus show destruction, followed by new pottery styles. These styles blend Anatolian and Aegean traditions, exactly what we'd expect from mixed populations. The Denyen mentioned by Ramesses III might be connected to Adana in Cilicia. But the Anatolian theory also has weaknesses. Why would Anatolian peoples destroy the Hittite Empire, their own cultural sphere? Why travel all the way to Egypt when closer lands were available? And why do Egyptian reliefs show such diverse appearances among the Sea Peoples? The Italian connection theory has gained support from recent DNA studies. The Sheridan mentioned in Egyptian texts might indeed connect to Sardinia. Bronze figurines from Sardinia dated to this period show warriors with horned helmets, exactly like the Sheridan in Egyptian reliefs. The Shekelesh might connect to Sicily, the Tarish to the Tyrrhenians or Etruscans. If true, it suggests Sea Peoples from across the Mediterranean. Not one people, but a confederation drawn from many lands. Recent DNA analysis of Bronze Age Sardinians shows genetic continuity with later populations, but also connections to the Eastern Mediterranean, as if populations moved both ways, east to west and west to east. The Mediterranean wasn't a barrier, but a highway. The timing is suggestive. Around 1200 BCE, the Terramare culture of northern Italy collapsed. Settlement, or abandoned populations, moved. The Apennine culture of central Italy shows sudden changes. New pottery styles, new metalworking techniques, new burial practices. Did Italian peoples flee eastward, joining the Sea Peoples movement. But this theory faces chronological problems. Some of the Sardinian and Sicilian evidence might be later than the Sea Peoples attacks. Are we seeing the Sea Peoples' origins or where they ended up? The causality is unclear. The climate change theory offers a different perspective. Scientific data shows a major climate event around 1200 BCE. The Late Bronze Age collapse coincides with a period of cooling and drying, particularly severe in the eastern Mediterranean. Pollen cores from the Sea of Galilee show a sharp decline in oak and pine, replaced by dry-adapted plants. A 300-year drought that would have devastated agriculture. Lake levels dropped, rivers ran low, crops failed. The drought would have hit Anatolia and Greece particularly hard. These regions depended on rainfall agriculture. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia with their river systems, failed harvests would have caused famine, triggering mass migration. Isotope analysis of teeth from burial sites shows people moving great distances. Individuals born in inland Anatolia buried in coastal Levantine sites. People from Greece found in Cyprus and Egypt. The entire eastern Mediterranean population in motion. The climate theory explains the ox carts and families. These weren't raiders, but climate refugees. Desperate peoples seeking new homes, any homes. The violence wasn't conquest, but survival. It also explains the synchronized collapse. Climate change affects entire regions simultaneously. Multiple societies under stress would fail at the same time. The Sea Peoples might have been both cause and symptom of the collapse. But climate alone can't explain everything. Egypt and Mesopotamia faced the same drought but survived. Some regions with favorable climate were still destroyed. And why the specific targeting of palaces and administrative centers? The systems collapse theory integrates multiple causes. The Bronze Age palace economies were complex, interconnected, fragile. They depended on long-distance trade for critical resources. Tin from Afghanistan, copper from Cyprus, grain from Egypt. Disruption anywhere would cascade everywhere. The palaces also depended on specialized workers. Scribes who could write Linear B, craftsmen who could work bronze, merchants who knew the trade routes. Lose these specialists, and the system collapses. Perhaps initial climate stress caused local failures. Refugees from failed states became raiders out of necessity. Their attacks disrupted trade, causing more failures. More failures created more refugees, more raiders. A cascade of collapse, each failure triggering the next. The Sea Peoples in this model weren't the cause, but the result. Displaced populations from many regions, banding together for survival. Their diversity explained by diverse origins. Their effectiveness explained by desperation. This theory best explains the archaeological evidence. The mixture of pottery styles, the blend of traditions, the combination of destruction and settlement, the Sea Peoples as both destroyers and victims. But where did they ultimately go? This is perhaps the greatest mystery. After destroying the Bronze Age world, most Sea Peoples vanish from history. The Peliset became the Philistines, settling in 5 cities along the southern Levantine coast: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gaza, Gath, Ekron. The Pentapolis of the Bible. They retained their distinct culture for centuries. Archaeological evidence shows Aegean-style pottery pork consumption, unusual in the region, and distinctive architecture. But even the Philistines gradually assimilated. By 600 BCE, they were largely indistinguishable from their neighbors. Their language disappeared, their gods forgotten. Only their name survives in Palestine, a reminder of ancient invaders. The Checkers settled at Dor and other northern sites. They appear in the Egyptian tale of Wenamun controlling the port. But within centuries, they too vanished. Absorbed into the general Canaanite population, the Shurden might have reached Sardinia, giving the island its name. Or perhaps Sardinians joined the Sea Peoples and returned home. The archaeological record is ambiguous. Sardinian culture shows Eastern influences, but also strong local continuity. Some Sea Peoples might have continued west. The Terish possibly becoming the Tyrrhenians or Etruscans. The Shekelesh perhaps reaching Sicily. But these connections are linguistic speculation, not proven fact. Recent genetic studies offer tantalizing clues. Modern Palestinians and Lebanese show genetic markers suggesting Aegean ancestry, dating to approximately the Bronze Age collapse period. About 10–15% of ancestry from European sources. Are these the genetic ghosts of the Sea Peoples? Similar studies in Sardinia and Sicily show Eastern Mediterranean input, also dating to the late Bronze Age. Bidirectional gene flow populations moving both ways. The Sea Peoples as part of a larger mixing of Mediterranean populations. But genetics can't tell us everything. It shows population movement, not cultural identity. Were these Sea Peoples or their victims? Conquerors or refugees? The DNA is silent on motivations. The linguistic evidence is equally fragmentary. A handful of possibly non-Semitic words in Biblical Hebrew. Sarin for ruler, Argaz for box, perhaps lapid for torch. Possible Philistine loanwords, but the etymology is disputed. Their language, if they had one unified language, is lost. Only one possible Sea Peoples inscription has been found. The Ekron inscription discovered in 1996. Written in a Canaanite dialect but mentioning Pitgar, possibly Greek Pythagoras. Dating to the 7th century BCE, long after the initial invasions. By then, the Philistines were writing in the local language. Their original tongue, if different, already forgotten. 3,200 years have passed since the Sea Peoples destroyed the Bronze Age world. We have excavated their victims, translated their correspondence, analyzed their DNA, yet they remain shadows defined more by what they destroyed than who they were. Consider the paradox. The Sea Peoples conducted the most successful military campaign in ancient history. They destroyed empires that had lasted centuries. They erased civilizations that seemed eternal. They ended an entire age of human history. Yet, we don't even know their real names. Every great conquest in history has left us details. We know Alexander's route through Asia. We can trace Caesar's path through Gaul. We have Genghis Khan's strategies, Attila's demands, Napoleon's letters. But the Sea Peoples left only ruins and questions. Perhaps that's what makes them so compelling. In an age where we can trace anyone's ancestry through DNA track, ancient trade routes through isotope analysis, read 3,000-year-old tablets, the Sea Peoples remain unknowable. They remind us that some mysteries can't be solved with technology. Some secrets die with their keepers. Modern archaeology continues to search for answers. Every year brings new excavations, new techniques, new possibilities. Underwater archaeology is exploring ancient harbors, searching for Sea Peoples' ships. Satellite imagery reveals previously unknown sites, destroyed cities waiting for excavation. Advanced dating techniques narrow down chronologies, making connections clearer. But each discovery seems to complicate rather than clarify. What if we're asking the wrong questions? What if there were no Sea Peoples as a unified force? What if the Egyptian scribes, trying to make sense of chaos, invented a single enemy where there were many? What if the Bronze Age collapse wasn't caused by invasion, but by 100 different failures, each unique, together catastrophic? Or perhaps the Sea Peoples were exactly what they appear. The ancient world's perfect storm. Displaced populations driven by climate change, united by desperation, armed with nothing to lose. They came, they destroyed, they dispersed. Not because they were conquerors, but because they were survivors. The Dark Age that followed their rampage lasted 300 years. When civilization finally recovered, it was transformed. Iron replaced bronze. Alphabets replaced syllabaries. City-states replaced empires. The classical world of Greece and Rome built on the ashes of the Bronze Age. In a sense, we live in the world the Sea Peoples created. A world born from catastrophe. Their story resonates today because it speaks to primal fears. The fear that civilization is fragile, that unknown forces can emerge from nowhere, that everything we've built can vanish in a generation. The Bronze Age kings thought their world was eternal. They were wrong, but perhaps there's another lesson. Egypt survived, damaged, diminished, but intact. They adapted, fought, endured. The Sea Peoples could destroy cities, but not the idea of civilization. Knowledge was lost, but rediscovered. Cities were abandoned, but rebuilt. The darkness ended as darkness always does. As we stand in the ruins of Hattusa, or walk the burned halls of Pylos, or study the desperate last letters of Ugarit, we're not just investigating ancient history. We're confronting the ultimate historical mystery, a reminder that the past keeps its secrets, that not every question has an answer, that sometimes the destroyers vanish as mysteriously as they appeared. Will we ever solve the mystery of the Sea Peoples? Every generation of archaeologists thinks they're close. Every new technology promises breakthrough. Yet the Sea Peoples remain just out of reach, visible in their effects, but invisible in their essence. Perhaps that's how they should remain. History's great unknown, the ancient destroyers who challenged empires, ended an age and vanished without a trace. The investigation continues. In laboratories where ancient DNA reveals population movements, in museums where pottery shards are pieced together, in universities where scholars debate every fragment of evidence. The Sea Peoples may be gone, but the search for them will never end. Because in searching for them, we're really searching for ourselves, for understanding of how civilizations rise and fall, for knowledge of what makes us fragile and what makes us endure.